Thanks for downloading the RealAg Radio podcast. If you enjoyed this program, 1, tell your friends, and 2, we got another show that you'll be interested in. It's called RealAg on the Weekends. It goes out every Saturday. It's broadcast across Saskatchewan on RealAg Radio on 650 CKOM and 980 CGME, as well as we podcast it as well. It's really a look at the week that was in Canadian agriculture. Make sure you check it out. It's called RealAg on the Weekend. Enjoy today's episode of RealAg Radio.
This episode of RealAg Radio is brought to you by high-performing new carbine insecticide from FMC. Carbine insecticide delivers fast, selective, and extended control of aphids in alfalfa and pulses, leaving beneficials like lady beetles to help in the fight. Ask your retailer today.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio.
Hello and welcome to RealAg Radio here on this April 24th. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and it is Agronomic Monday, and I am super thrilled to be hosting today, and I'm here all the way to Thursday. So yes, Sean Haney has taken a few days of much-deserved rest. He's going to be touring around in the States, and so I get to sit here in the host seat, and I'm super excited about it. So of course, today, all agronomy. We've got Peter Pete Johnson's going to join me for a couple segments. We'll see what's top of mind for him, and then I have pulled a wheat school episode and a soybean school episode that are very timely and very interesting that I think many of you are probably talking about, thinking about, trying to figure out what you're going to do with early season nutrient management in beans, as well as dealing with some of those very pesky weeds in wheat. So stick around for that for the end of the show. I am, of course, as I said, here all week. So I'd love to know what you would like me to track down. I've got some ideas of my own, of course, but we love to hear from you. You can call that RealAg listener line, 855-776-6147. Leave your feedback there. Or, of course, you can find us across social media at RealAgriculture. And we love to hear your comments, your ideas, your feedback. We appreciate the good, the bad, the very good. Let's put it that way. I like to keep things positive. All right. Okay, so let's get to the show without further ado. I'll be back after the break here with Mr. Peter Pete Johnson here on RealAg Radio.
Looking to launch a successful career in agri-sales or take yours to the next level? Lakeland College's Agri-Sales and Customer Relations Certificate takes you beyond the classroom to learn from the experts. This apprenticeship-style program will teach you everything you need to know to thrive in a sales career. The real world doesn't wait. Register for Agri-Sales and Customer Relations today at lakelandcollege.ca.
Peter Johnson at Wheat Pete, RealAgriculture.com, and what an opportunity! Oh my gosh! You think you can't grow better wheat? You are absolutely wrong. We're going to show you how to strive for those record wheat yields that they get in the UK and in New Zealand. You can grow 150 bushel wheat. I'll show you how.
Catch Wheat Pete's Word every Wednesday on RealAgriculture.com or download the podcast on iTunes or Spotify.
How's your seed quality? What should you treat with? What about herbicide carryover and environmental concerns? Spring is here, and you've got a lot of things to think about in regards to your pulse crop. The Pulse School on Real Agriculture has information and advice for all these questions and more to help you navigate this season. Brought to you by BASF. Pulse School episodes are available at pulseschool.com, realagriculture.com, or as a podcast on your favorite streaming service. Download the latest episode today.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio. I am your host on this Agronomic Monday, Lyndsey Smith. This segment is sponsored by Koch Agronomic Services, makers of Synthos nutrient enhancer, designed to make crops stronger by combating phosphorus deficiency. Learn more about Synthos and other nutrient management, nutrient protection, and seed enhancement solutions at kochagronomicservices.ca. All right, it is Monday, and so Pete Johnson is here for... well, to cover everything that we didn't talk about on Wednesday, I guess, with the word. Welcome here, Pete.
Hey, thanks, Lyndsey. Thanks for having me. Man, it just stays cold. Holy snap. And it's not supposed to be this cold this time of year, but she is chilly at night, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's we certainly, I feel like we caught up in that it felt like it was the winter that wouldn't end. We're, of course, talking about Ontario here. My condolences, though, to those of you out west that are still dealing with snow. But we had this amazing warm-up, and then here we are, back to cool temps, cloudy days, a little chilly nights. So are we worried about, maybe we'll start there, let's just broach the subject. There is some corn and soybeans in the ground. Are we worried about them or not?
So actually, it astounds me, but I know of one grower, quite a large grower, has 50% of their corn acres in the ground. And you go, wow, like they went hard and they just figured it's going to work out fine. When you ask, are we worried? Yeah, absolutely we're worried. If you go back to 1997, we had to start something similar to this year, where we got that warm week kind of late April-ish. It was maybe not quite as early as this year, but in 1997, we weren't pushing quite as early, generally speaking, so I think it relates pretty well. And then we got 5 weeks of just cold, crappy, backward weather that you just go like, how could you get that long a stretch of this kind of weather? And no more crop got planted through that 5 weeks. And it took 5 weeks for those cornfields to emerge. At the end of the day, the stands were okay, but they weren't perfect. And the corn that we planted on the late side in the better conditions had a way better stand and actually yielded a bit higher. But there was very little of that corn after 5 weeks we had to replant. So are we worried? Absolutely. And to me, Lyndsey, what I'm most worried about is the uniformity of emergence. Mm-hmm. And when we get these cold temperatures, the differences in microenvironments in the soil start to have a really big difference. So if for whatever reason that particular seed is just on a little bit of a rise versus the seeds around it or the seeds close by, and so that little bit of a rise, or it's a little bit blacker soil and it warms up and it gets to 15 degrees or 13 degrees soil temperature through part of the day, it's going to continue to grow and try to emerge, while those other seeds that are in different microenvironments close by, if they don't cross that 10-degree threshold, they basically are just sitting there waiting for warmer temperatures. And we know the importance of uniform emergence. I mean, way back when, Lara de Mosic quoted or coined the phrase that corn is a princess, and it absolutely is. It needs to come up uniformly. So that's the biggest concern out of this early corn, in my estimation, is will it become less uniform at emergence than we want it to be? And we don't know that question yet. I hope the answer is no, but that's my worry with corn. Soybeans, I don't care. The chances, no, they'll be fine. Drive on. Have a nice day.
Drive on. I thought you were just going to leave it at you don't care, because of course we all know how much we love soybeans. So we'll just leave it there, I guess. Now, okay, but you bring up a few things very, very interesting that you say like 97, because of course Manitoba is experiencing not quite as bad, but a similar year also to 97, where there was large snowstorms late in the year. That was, I think the last big one in 97 was in early April, but they've since had another storm since that this year, and certainly a flooding risk. And so, could we see something similar? Is this weather pattern? And of course, we know that that Drew Lerner at World Weather Inc. loves to relate sort of years back and forth. So interesting to see that's the year you pick for this year, because it certainly seems like that in Manitoba as well. Would love to hear, of course, if you're in Alberta or Saskatchewan, if you would say the same. It's always nice to hear. And then looking forward, what do we have to look forward to? And so, Pete, if it is a repeat of 97, I'm a little bit not so pleased, because I don't want 5 weeks of cool, crappy weather. So if we could fix that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
If we could fix that, Lyndsey, we would fix that.
Yes.
However, I think we both know the reality is that we don't have any control over what's going to happen with the weather. And so whatever happens, we'll just take it and try to figure out how to manage around it once we know what happened.
That's right. Okay. All right. We have so many topics to get through, so we'll move to a few of them. I want to move next to a real crop, wheat, of course. You are hearing reports or discussions about tissue testing. So this is, I guess, my one question. With that amazing warm-up that we had, we've already got some wheat schools done in the field where the crop looks great. Wheat doesn't need the heat like necessarily a corn or a soybean. So is the wheat crop going to continue, even in these cool conditions, to advance? And talk to me about this tissue testing question.
Yeah, so absolutely. The wheat is a base 0 crop, not a base 10 crop. And all that means, Lyndsey, is that, as I mentioned earlier, if it's not over 10 Celsius, corn basically does nothing. Soybeans do nothing. That's the temperature at which they start to grow, where their enzymes are active and the plant takes off. With wheat, it's a base 0 crop, which means that any time it's over 0 Celsius, that crop is moving forward. It's not quite exactly true, to be honest. Wheat is a base 2 crop, but our development predictions work much better when we use base 0, which is kind of interesting, because you would wonder, well, why is that? But it just works that way. So base 0 crop, yeah, it's currently 9 Celsius. The wheat crop is growing. Is it growing very fast? The answer is no. So it's been incredibly interesting. That warm week that we had, the wheat just was flying. And we got almost, I think, a week ahead of normal stage of development in that one warm stretch. It had been chugging along, and most of it was in pretty good shape coming out of winter. And it hadn't been going really fast, but it was sort of on track. And that 1 week was twice as much heat as what we would normally expect. So we're suddenly 5 or 7 days ahead of normal. Well, now we're just ratcheting back till we're more on track for normal. Are we developing? Yes. I've been watching a particular winter barley field, because we know we need to apply a growth regulator there. It's on really powerful ground. Winter barley has terrible standability to begin with. And we're trying to make sure we target that growth stage 30 exactly. And so I'm there every couple days, but we need more growing degree day accumulation to get it to growth stage 30. I can find the head. When I use my magnifying glass right at the crown, the head is there. But growth stage 30, it needs to be that 1/2 inch, 3/4 of an inch away from the crown. And that movement up the stem is just painfully slow. And my guess is when we started the process, we needed 50 growing degree days. Well, when you get a high of 9 and a low of 0, or a high of 10 and a low of 0, that's 5 growing degree days. That means it would take 10 days to get there. It probably won't take that long, but it's slow. So you're right. Everything on the wheat crop has just we've hit the brakes.
Mm-hmm. So then you have heard discussion on tissue testing, specifically magnesium discussion. Should we be tissue testing at this point?
Yeah, so a really great question. And it's, I just love this Great Lakes Shed. The reason I love it as much as anything, Lyndsey, is because it's got enough excitement around the wheat crop, and people looking at the wheat crop and going out to the field and doing stuff they've never, ever done before. And so Daryl Boersma, great farmer, great on Twitter, he went out and he pulled tissue samples already in his wheat crop. Who does that, man? 5 years ago, nobody did that. They didn't care it was wheat. Oh, yeah, it was wheat. No, he pulled tissue samples, and it's showing ultra low in magnesium. And so he's coming back, and we had a great Twitter discussion around that. What does that mean? And we actually don't know exactly, is that normal in the spring, that it just is low in magnesium? His soil test is okay for magnesium. All his other nutrients are in the very good range. So you go, okay, do we just need some warm temperatures, get a bit of root growth, get the roots to take the magnesium up and drive that tissue test higher? Is the tissue test, the critical value, actually wrong for magnesium at this stage of growth? Because how much data do we have around tissue sampling right at green up? And frankly, I don't think we have very much, but maybe it is super low. And we do have some growers out there. Certainly Andy Timmerman's got second place in the Yen last year, and he's done some trials. And on average, he's picking up 3 or 4 bushel per acre from magnesium on his wheat crop, up to 9 bushels in some of his strips. But on average, it's kind of in that 3 to 4 bushels. And you say, wow, ultra low magnesium, that's a great place to do some test strips. Let's get out there and have a look. Is it real? I don't think we know. But gosh, if ever there was an opportunity to try something, I think that's the opportunity. And that's how we learn and move the bar forward.
Mm-hmm. I have to say it is sort of fascinating. So this is, to me, an example of you don't know what you don't know, right? And how do you find out? Well, you figure out what tools you have and you start to test, and you start not just the tissue test, but exactly that. Then you treat some and you don't treat others and you compare it. Like this is, and so it is really exciting. And you're right that a project like the Great Lakes Yen, the Yield Enhancement Network is, I mean, it means that there's other people doing it too, which I think is super encouraging, right? So we can all learn from each other, and you've got somebody who's sort of cheering for you, which I think is important. Okay, we're going to take a quick break, but Pete, you're going to stick around. We're going to do one more segment because, of course, there's some very important things we do need to talk about, especially about some herbicide resistance that we're dealing with as well. So we'll be back right after this.
ABJ Agri-Products is North America's exclusive distributor for air bubble jets and easy jets. These sprayer nozzles reduce the number of driftable droplets and at the same time maintain a uniform droplet size, primarily between 300 and 400 micron, ensuring more even dispersion of your chemical products, providing reduced drift and increased plant coverage. Let us help improve your spraying operation by visiting abjagra.com. That's abjagri.com.
As you head out into the field this season, the Corn School's got you covered. Everything from tillage discussions, weed control info, field trial results, yield strategies, and more. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com has the information and advice you need to help you succeed. Brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF. Corn School episodes are available at cornschool.com, from RealAgriculture.com, or as a podcast from your favorite streaming service. Download the latest episode today.
Want to get the best out of your soybean crops? Whether you've been growing them for a generation or are just starting into soybeans, find what you need to know at soybeanschool.com. You'll see videos on growing tips, pest control, and much more from specialists across the region, all in one place. Easy for you to access from your desktop, tablet, or mobile phone. Maximize your yields by staying up to date with the Soybean School, presented by BASF, Pride Seeds, and Syngenta Canada.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio on this Agronomic Monday. Do you know that the answer to low supply and high prices for nitrogen is Invita? A microbe with systemic nitrogen fixation, Invita works throughout the foliage and roots, providing a right place, right time source of nitrogen to maximize yield in corn, wheat, soybeans, and potatoes. Book your Invita while supplies last. All right, I promised, and yes, he is back, Peter Wheat Pete Johnson. I did want to quickly mention, Pete, that we are on the Agronomist tonight, 8 p.m. Eastern. So if today's show is not enough, Wheat Pete, don't worry, there's more. And Pete, who's our other guest? This is super exciting. I'll let you share the news.
I couldn't be more excited than to be on with Phil Needham from Needham Ag Technologies out of Calhoun, Kentucky. Phil is just one of those wheat gurus, and we've been talking back and forth. He's got a bunch of cool stuff to bring to the table. We mentioned yen. It sort of fits into that yen discussion, and we're going to, I think, bounce back and forth and challenge each other around what are the right numbers to be targeting. And maybe Ontario is a bit different than Kentucky. Maybe it's not. But, yeah, he's just such an incredible resource, and really looking forward to being on the Agronomist with him tonight. It'll be great fun.
That's right. All right. And so that is 8 p.m. Eastern. If you head to the Real Agriculture YouTube or Facebook page, or you can head to realagriculture.com/agronomists, and it goes live 8 p.m. Eastern. You can hop on. There's a great group that joins us every week. Farmers, agronomists across Canada hop on, ask questions, challenge the guests. And I got to be honest, Pete, between you and Phil, I'm not sure we're going to be able to contain the amount of energy in one episode. It might spill over to the Agronomist After Dark. I don't know. We'll see. Okay. Depends how late you can stay up, I guess. So switching gears, though, a little bit, we do want to talk about Group 14 resistant ragweed. What are we doing to try and get ahead of this beast?
So it's a really scary development, Lyndsey. And you say, well, why is that? It's because we've relied so heavily on the Group 14 chemistry in edible beans, so the white beans, the Adzuki beans, the black beans, the kidney beans, like that whole class of chemistries. We've relied heavily on the Group 14s and in IP soybeans. And Ontario has a huge IP soybean industry, and we're actually recognized as kind of world leaders for providing consistent quality of that class of soybeans, huge export market into the Asian regions. They use specific soybeans, like they will have soy milk, for example, that is actually named after the variety of soybeans that we grow to make that soy milk. And they're very specific about the protein quantities or the oil quantities and the protein profiles. And so it's a big deal if we cannot control ragweed. And there's 5 sites in Ontario now that have been confirmed with Group 14 resistance. Most of them are also Group 2 resistant. So if we have Group 2 and Group 14 cross resistance, boy, the herbicide selection gets really slim, particularly in edible beans, because in edible beans, we can't use the Group 5, the triazines. In soybeans, we can go back to metribuzin, but we also know that there is Group 5 resistant ragweed out there. It's not as common, but Lyndsey, you know what's going to happen if we start relying on metribuzin as our only mode of action for ragweed control in IP soybeans. It's just a matter of time, and it's probably not very long.
So are we at a point where these have been found? Do we have a good sense of farmers know what they're looking for and are sending it in to verify, whether or not it's resistant? Or are we still, because it does certainly seem that a lot of the resistance sort of goes unnoticed for a while, and then we start testing and we find that it's quite widespread. Are we keeping tabs on this, do you think?
So I think that agronomists and farmers in Ontario, and I think in many other regions as well, but I can speak specifically to Ontario, are far more aware of weed escapes now than they used to be. So if you go way back into the 60s and 70s, when we first got triazine-resistant pigweed, because back then we only had atrazine, or the Group 5s, the triazines, but in corn we were using atrazine, and we did have 2,4-D, and those were the 2 herbicides, and the pigweed would not die, and you would say, what's the matter there? Go spray it again with atrazine, that'll kill it. And we got into some real train wrecks because we didn't even think about resistance. Now, we've been noticing that, particularly post-emergence, going out there with Reflex, so it's a Group 14, it's been the go-to product in terms of ragweed control in edible beans and IP soybeans as a post-emerge product. And it just has not been working. Like the number of farmers and growers, agronomists, just saying, man, it just isn't working. So everybody is paying attention. And when we see that, we start sending samples in to Francois Tardif or Peter Sikkema saying, can you test these? Because maybe we have Group 14 resistance. And so sure enough, we do. And I think we're far more ahead of the game with this than we have been in the past because we've been hit with it enough times that we're paying attention. And so now the real question becomes, okay, we have 5 sites with it confirmed. That means it's more out there than just the 5 sites. But the beauty of it, I think, is that those 5 sites, it wasn't a train wreck. There was some plants that broke through. And so you collect the seed and you send it away. And it's a challenge even on the resistance front. Mike Cobra actually did his master's on ragweed. And I was chatting with him about this. And he says, one of the issues, like, man, you get the ragweed seed and you try to grow it to do the resistance testing or whatever he was doing with it. I can't even recall now. But regardless, you're trying to do that. And you can't get the stupid seeds to germinate. And one time you'll get 5% germination, and the next time you'll get 95% germination. So even doing the testing is a bit of a challenge. But we're testing them. We're testing for multiple modes of resistance or multiple resistance to groups of chemistry. We're also looking at, does it make a difference if a Group 14 is a soil-applied Group 14 versus a post-emerge Group 14? Because with the Group 27s, there are differences there. So I think we're way ahead of the game compared to where we would have been 10 years ago, but it's still a huge issue, and we need to figure out what's going on.
And you make a really good point. And actually, I highly recommend everyone stick around for the next segment because we've got Dr. Charles Geddes on with Kelvin Heppner to talk about managing resistance as well. And certainly we're also having these conversations for Western Canada about, within a group, is there resistance to certain types or certain actives and certain types, but not all. And so definitely need to drill down and figure out just what options we really have, but also what else we can be doing. And that's where the cultural controls come in. So stick around for that after. But sticking with the weed control question, you've got some insights into fall weed control, yes or no, and what it looks like this spring in the wheat crop. So what are you observing?
Lyndsey, I am just astounded because we know the benefit of fall weed control in winter wheat. And we've been down this road tons. And man, when they took glyphosate away as an option for burn downs in edible beans, it just totally changed how we manage weeds in the fall in winter wheat. And you simply can't spray them in the spring. So tremendously interesting. The dandelions, by the time we got that warm week where the wheat was flying, the dandelions, stupid things, were already in bud. And by the time they're in bud, they're just that much harder to control, whereas where we sprayed them last fall, whether it was with glyphosate as a burn down before the wheat got up, or whether we sprayed them with Infinity or Pixero or one of the herbicides that we can use in the fall, there's almost no dandelions. Like, those fields are clean, clean, clean. I have a client, they got almost all their wheat sprayed in the fall. There was one field, the beans weren't off, they got busy doing other stuff. That one field did not get Infinity applied in the fall. That was the herbicide they were using. It's not the only one, but that's what they were using. Oh my gosh, it is just such a mess of dandelions that you go, Crumbus, how can that be? And there is chickweed out there as well where we didn't get fall control. And, some of these weeds, even when you do fall control, you can get some weeds emerging in the spring. But what's really interesting is Peter Sikkema's work would suggest on fleabane, if we spray it in the fall, we get less weed control than as if we spray the fleabane in the spring. So we kill more fleabane plants when we spray in the spring because there's fleabane that emerge in March. It is a tough nut. It emerges virtually every month of the year. If I spray it in October or November, there's going to be fleabane plants in the wheat because they germinate in March. But when you look at the yield data, when we spray it and take those fleabane plants that are there out in the fall, even though we see more fleabane plants in the wheat crop, we get higher yields because the fleabane wasn't there competing with the wheat crop when the wheat crop was setting its head right now. And so even though we don't get quite as good weed control, we get higher wheat yields by that fall weed control. So just some tremendous differences out there. And I mean, it really makes me as an agronomist, I walk wheat fields, I got a few dandelions, a few fleabane plants, a few bluegrass plants. So none of them, combined, you would say it's not worth spraying. But if we don't spray it and we get weed seed return, then we just exacerbate that problem. And it's a really hard call as an agronomist to say, do we spray to try and have it perfect, or do we just know it's not going to be economic this year and know that we have to continue to work at those weeds moving forward?
So let's say, just hypothetically here at the end of this segment, that someone does have a dandelion problem that is in bud right now, say in the Kinburn area, and plans to go into soybeans and would like to get the sprayer on very quickly. What would you mix in the tank if that's the main weed that you're after?
Yeah, so if you're going into soybeans and you have time, again, are you doing tillage? There's so many questions around that, Lyndsey, but glyphosate is really quite good on dandelions in the spring. Keep the rate up. It is rate sensitive, so you can't shave the rate on the glyphosate, but glyphosate will do the job. There's other products out there that will do the job as well. You can add some 2,4-D to that burn down if you wish, and that will improve the dandelion control, but then you have to delay planting the soybeans and make sure you use 2,4-D ester. Don't use amine because then you have big problems. But that's basically the go-to mix if dandelions is the big problem. Glyphosate plus 2,4-D and wait 7 days to plant.
All right. I'll let my neighbor know. Yeah, there you go. All right, Pete. We'll talk to you in a couple hours on The Agronomist. Thanks so much for this.
It's been fun as always, Lyndsey. Thanks for having me. And don't miss The Agronomist tonight because Phil Needham, I'm just so looking forward to discussing things with him and learning from him yet again.
Yes, I'm excited. All right. We will be back with more RealAg Radio right after this.
If farmers know one thing to be true, it's this. There are a lot of factors you can't control. The weather, breakdowns, and a million other variables standing between you and a successful season. But for all the uncertainty, you wouldn't change a thing, because that's farming. And that's why Koch Agronomic Services wants to make life on the farm a bit more predictable. From nutrient management and protection to seed enhancement, get the confidence of being in control. Visit kochagsolutions.com.
Whether you're seeding, harvesting, or anything in between, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has you covered. Timely agronomic information from industry experts available online anytime. Give your wheat crop a good start and a great finish with the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by C&M Seeds, Syngenta Canada, and the Alberta Wheat and Barley Commission.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio on this Monday, April 24th. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and this segment is brought to you by Field Heroes, powered by the Western Grain Research Foundation. Visit fieldheroes.ca to learn how beneficial insects can benefit your farm. All right, we jump now to, as promised, a discussion with Dr. Charles Geddes with AAFC to talk about how measuring cultural controls and their impact on weed control can actually be as effective as a herbicide mode of action. For that discussion, we go to Kelvin Heppner and Dr. Charles Geddes.
For Real Agriculture, I'm Kelvin Heppner, and we're at Crop Connect in Winnipeg. Pleased to be joined by Charles Geddes, weed scientist with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada in Lethbridge. And Charles, you're leading a research project looking at herbicide-resistant kochia in Western Canada, certainly a growing problem for producers. Different cultural practices for managing herbicide-resistant kochia. Can you fill us in on what you're looking at and some of the findings that you've learned so far?
Yeah, for sure. So we've been working on a project that has been funded by the Integrated Crop Agronomy Cluster. This project has been ongoing for the last 5 years, and there's multiple different components to the project. But really, the theme is how can we manage multiple herbicide-resistant kochia? And what we're finding is that many of these cultural tools are quite effective in managing kochia. When we're talking about cultural weed management, these are essentially these are sort of integrating agronomic practices, so things like reducing row spacing, increasing seeding rates, choosing competitive cultivars, designing your crop rotation, right? So in this particular project, we have some rotational studies. I talked about a couple of them here today. One is a 4-year canola wheat lentil rotation, where we're looking at this rotation using herbicide layering, right? So trying to apply multiple effective herbicide modes of action throughout the year to manage this herbicide-resistant kochia population, right? But we have that same rotation present using either wide or narrow row spacing, so 18-inch versus 9-inch row spacing, or recommended seeding rates versus double the recommended seeding rates throughout the rotation. And what we're finding is that across all of the years of the study, talking about kochia biomass, right? Across all of the years, all of the crops in this study, if you integrate the narrow row spacings and higher seeding rates, we're seeing an 80% reduction in kochia biomass, right? So that just stresses the importance of integrating some of these cultural methods and agronomy choices into planning your cropping system, right? To put that into perspective, that 80% is similar to the threshold that herbicide regulators use to register a herbicide for control of a specific species, right? So we're seeing control levels similar to a new herbicide mode of action, right? So that's pretty impressive, actually.
So what's the baseline that you're comparing to with that 80%? Common practices, or what would your comparison be there?
So in that particular study, we're comparing, that's basically the narrow row spacing, higher seeding rates to the wider row spacing with recommended seeding rates.
Okay. Can you put some numbers on row spacing, for example, what narrower and wide might be, just to help producers understand their drill setup and how it might relate?
Yeah, so in this particular study, I mean, our wide row is arguably quite wide, but it was 18 inches, and our narrow rows were 9 inches. Okay. So in that particular study.
For all those crops?
For all of those crops,
okay.
Yeah. And so the other, another thing that we've been looking at for cultural weed management is looking at the diversity of crops in a rotation, right? So what I mean by that is different crops in the rotation, but also different life cycles of crops in the rotation. So we have one study, just as an example, comparing a range of 4-year rotations that have only summer annuals versus alternating a winter annual and summer annual in the rotation, right? So winter wheat, for example, with a summer annual crop following that, or comparing that to perennials as well, right? And so we're seeing excellent efficacy in those rotations that are alternating a winter annual with a summer annual, right? The idea there being winter wheat, for example, is already established in the spring when kochia is just emerging, right? Giving it a competitive advantage. But then also, winter wheat tends to be harvested before kochia produces viable seed, at least where we've been researching it across Western Canada, right? So if you can harvest that crop before the kochia produces seed, that decapitates the plants, right? Helping to prevent seed return to the soil seed bank, but also opening up another opportunity for timely management as well.
Okay. Getting back to your comparison of the efficacy of using these practices versus a new mode of action coming on the market, I guess there's also you can make the economic argument to increasing your seeding rates and using narrow row spacing with that analogy as well.
Yeah, so this work, we're coming to the close of sort of the fifth year of the work, and at the very end of it, now that we're aggregating all of the data together, we will be doing the economics on those rotations as well. So that will kind of be coming out in the future. What I can say to comment on that right now is we what I didn't talk about is the yield side of things, right? So for comparing just a recommended versus the double the recommended seeding rates, when we did implement the double recommended seeding rates, we didn't see a yield decline anywhere, which is sometimes I get that question a lot about if they're increasing seeding rates, is there going to be more vegetative production than seed production, right? We didn't see that here. If anything, we saw in the wheat or in the cereal part of the rotation, we did see occasional yield increases when we did double those seeding rates. So there might be a bit of a balance there, helping to pay for some of those higher seeding rates. And it does make sense to do this, especially in crops where your seed cost is a little bit lower, right? Maybe some of those cereals, for example. Yeah.
Where did this research take place, just for context? I'm guessing here in Manitoba, where we have a little bit wetter climate, we might have more disease issues with tighter row spacing, higher plant populations.
Yeah, so the studies that I've been talking about have taken place either or in Lethbridge, Alberta, and Scott, Saskatchewan. We also have a similar study, but with different crops in Manitoba as well, looking at including corn, wheat, canola, soybean. Okay. And so that particular study, I haven't sort of crunched all of the data on it yet, but we are seeing that narrowing up those rows especially does seem to work quite well in some of those crops like soybean, for example, where the question is, do you plant wide or do you plant narrow, right?
And again, as we see more issues with herbicide resistance in kochia, these tools will be, again, the number of tools in the toolbox we're not seeing more, and this is an old one that we can bring back potentially.
Yeah, exactly. Like so these tools, there's nothing new here per se, right? But what we are showing is that integrating some of those old tools does work quite well to manage some of these issues that are really showing up across the prairies.
All right. Thanks for your time and your expertise again, Charles.
All right, thank you very much.
All right, big thanks to Kelvin and Charles for that one. We're going to take a quick break, and I will be back with more agronomy right after this. Infuse some energy into your next corporate event, customer meeting, or conference with RealAg Radio, Canada's national agriculture radio show. Create a unique experience at your next event with host Sean Haney, broadcasting RealAg Radio live on SiriusXM, featuring exciting guests, captivating interviews, and the latest news from the agriculture community. Contact advertising at RealAgriculture.com or call 587-787-1795 to book your on location with RealAg Radio today.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Welcome back to this final segment of RealAg Radio here on this Agronomic Monday. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and this segment is brought to you by Granubor from US Borax. Ask for it by name. All right, we hop now to a fascinating discussion on very early season nutrient management for soybeans. Yes, we are talking starter and pop-up fertilizer with Horst Bohner and Bernard Tobin on this Soybean School.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin. Welcome to the Soybean School. It is mid-April, and depending on your weather, planting may be only a few days away. One of the questions we heard a lot this winter is, should I use starter fertilizer? NPK sulfur, will it drive early season growth? Will it deliver more bushels? To tackle those questions today, I am joined by Omafra soybean specialist Horst Bohner. Hi, Horst. Hey, great to have you on the Soybean School.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Good to be with you.
Now, Horst, you've talked to a lot of growers this past winter, and you had a lot of questions about starter fertilizer. What did they want to know?
Well, I think with soybeans, the key question is, of course, do starters or pop-ups actually make a significant difference compared to just broadcast? Because, of course, when soybeans first came into the province back in the 1960s and even right into the 1990s, we really would have said that there's very little response to a starter or a pop-up in soybeans. And the question is, as yields have gone up, has that remained the same? And just before we try to answer the question, I think it's important to recognize, too, that in terms of a definition, when I say pop-up, I mean fertilizer right in furrow, right close to the seed, touching the seed. And then a starter, most people would define that as some sort of a 2x2 band. And the rate will vary, of course, might be as much as half of crop removal. So that helps us just in our thinking, right? When I say starter, I don't necessarily mean just a small amount of fertilizer. I might mean a fair bit to try and feed that crop.
So let's talk seed safety. Why do we need to consider when putting down that 2x2 band?
Well, that's right. I mean, even in a 2x2 band, even though that's generally quite safe compared to in furrow, right? If we start with the conversation of in furrow, we generally in the soybean world say that you should have no potassium at all in furrow because of that salt index, and because all these fertilizers, especially N and K, of course, have a high salt index, and so therefore, we don't want that germ to be affected, and soybeans are well known for being quite sensitive. So when we're talking about in furrow, we talk about a little bit of N and P being okay because we want that growth to get going. We keep K right out of it, right? And that part of that is seed safety. Part of it is because the plant needs a lot of K later, not early on in the season. Both 2x2 band and in furrow have a limit. And the limit, of course, depends a lot on your soil type. Sandy soils or dry conditions, the limit is much lower. So it's not as easy as giving one number, although generally, in terms of a textbook answer, we say that the N plus K number in a 2x2 band should not exceed 90 pounds in 30-inch rows. That's lots, right? But final thought on that, no potassium in furrow for soybeans is the general rule of thumb that I still go by, although we can get away with a little bit, but not too much, right?
Hey, let's talk sulfur. A lot of conversations always about sulfur. Is it required for early season success, and where does it fit?
Well, the sulfur question is still, for the soybean world, not completely answered, right? We get kind of some contradictory information out of the U.S. that maybe sulfur and nitrogen has more of a play when seeding early, right, which we're all pushing towards compared to seeding late. And we actually have some nice trials set up this year, or we're hoping to if the weather cooperates, to try and answer that question, early versus late. So far, of course, when we have applied ammonium sulfate and compared that to just straight urea, we haven't seen that much, right? 2.3 bushels out of straight urea in the spring and 2.9 out of ammonium sulfate. And statistically, that was nothing across the whole 13 sites. Only one out of those sites did we see a statistical response. But to be fair, and to try and answer your question, Bernard, none of those were planted really early. Those are kind of all in a normal planting window. So I think we still don't know for sure whether there's a bit more of a response in early planting. We're going to try and answer that over the next couple of years.
Hey, let's talk nitrogen here. What's required, when it comes to N?
Well, that's part of the fascinating part, too, when it comes to, these big soybean yields. Of course, what we're trying to do is get the canopy closed fast, because we know that the quality of light in July is much higher than it is in August. So you want those beans to be fully canopied, latest at early pod set. And so, of course, a little bit of nitrogen might help fill that. So part of this timing question that we're trying to answer is, we're still playing with nitrogen, right? But as you can see from those 13 sites that we just talked about, a 2.3 bushel response is not a huge number. Now, what we're going to do is actually increase the amount of N a little bit to see if we can get some more out of it, because that's what our American friends are saying. We need a little more N, especially in a no-till situation, to really get that big response. I think the neat part about it is that the response seems to be edging up to some nitrogen as we get into that 70, 80 bushel zone that some of us have been lucky enough to have the last few years, right?
Right. Hey, next up, phosphorus. Do we need P in our starter? We talked about it a little bit earlier. How much?
Well, the thing you got to understand, of course, is with starters, again, the main two nutrients we're talking about are nitrogen and phosphorus. Here's the problem. When you look at how soybean roots respond to phosphorus, you can see from this picture, boy, when we feed a little bit of P, the roots are much more developed, right, than when we don't. Logically, here's the problem, right? Soybeans need a lot less phosphorus early on. If you compare them to wheat, wheat uses 15 pounds, corn 4 pounds, and soybeans only 1 pound per acre in the first 30 days of life, right? And of course, soybeans also in the seed have has twice as much phosphorus than something like corn. And so logically speaking, soybeans shouldn't need as much. And here's the kicker, right? We've done these trials. We applied 50 pounds of MAP in furrow, and on average, our response across 16 sites was only 1.4 bushels. And the truth of it there, Bernard, was it all came down to soil test. We had 3-4 bushel responses, but only when the soil test was low, right?
Yeah. Hey, and that leads me to my last question on potassium, right? What do we need here, and how important is your soil test in determining, that rate, that low test versus that adequate, soil test?
Yeah, I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head in terms of bringing up potassium. That's really what it's still about with soybeans, because they're such large removers. Hey, if there's one thing I've learned about pop-ups and starters and broadcast with soybeans, it all comes down to soil test value. Any of those are possible options to get yields up. And, we've seen 2, sometimes even 3 bushels to a pop-up, up to 5 bushels. I occasionally see 6 or even 7 bushels to a starter. Now I'm talking 2x2 band, but only if the soil test is low. If the soil test is good or even medium, we have a hard time seeing anything. And that's why as an industry, we're still trying to learn when and where starters or pop-ups really make sense. We know broadcast, we know soybeans respond very well to good soil fertility, right? Or even a broadcast springtime application if the soil test is low. But if the soil test is adequate, we're still chasing, a very small number, if anything.
Right. Well, Horst, hey, it's always great to have you on the Soybean School. Some great insights. Thanks for stopping by.
It's been fun. Thank you.
All right, that does it for me here for this Agronomic Monday on RealAg Radio. Thank you so much for joining me. And of course, thank you to Peter Johnson, to Dr. Charles Geddes, and Horst Bohner. And of course, my colleagues Bernard Tobin and Kelvin Heppner for making this show possible. I appreciate it so very much. And of course, huge shout out to Jay Strovey, our producer. All right, I am here, as I mentioned, for the rest of the week. Well, at least till Thursday. Sean will be back on Friday. So I'd love to get some feedback. You can zip me an email, lsmith@realagriculture.com, or you can send a message to that RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Leave me a message there. Let me know what you want to hear about Wednesday's show. Of course, we try to highlight some market coverage, so I am lining that up. So if you've got a particular commodity that we don't cover a lot, let me know. I'll see if I can find an expert to weigh in. I did let Twitter know I was doing that, and the responses have been nothing short of hilarious. Some of them I might take seriously, some of them not so much. But of course, with that, I am back tomorrow. Looking forward to it. Thank you for listening. I appreciate it so much. You can find me at Real Loud Lindsay on social media if you'd like. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Cheers.
Thank you for downloading this episode of RealAg Radio, brought to you by high-performing new carbine insecticide from FMC. New carbine insecticide hits aphids hard with effective, selective, and extended control. It also has activity on lygus and tarnished plant bugs. Ask your retailer today.